Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining me today to talk a little bit about digital adoption platforms. What are they? How are they different than what we've used in the past? And what do they mean for you as you're trying to drive adoption of technology within your organization? I'm Linda Lampert. I'm a director in the Enterprise Technology Adoption Group at GP Strategies. I've been working, helping companies implement new software for more than 25 years now, have lived the evolution of digital adoption platforms and other technology in support of learning and performance support for many, many years. So as I started seeing this term digital adoption platform or digital adoption solution in the marketplace the last few years, started trying to learn a lot more about it. Many of our customers have been using tools like this for many years. And so really just wanted to spend a few minutes today talking to you about these tools, what we've learned so far, and share a little bit of our experience. So what is a digital adoption platform? Originally, this term was used, I believe, by Whatfix, but really talking about software that is integrated on top or into other software applications or websites. So it can be used with on-premise software, it can be used with cloud-based software, or on many different kinds of websites that people might have. And really, what it does is it guides users through tasks or things that they're trying to do in this software. And it can work in a lot of different ways, depending on what your organization is trying to do and depending on user preference. The big key here is that it relies on contextual information. So information that what you are doing, it knows what content to give you. And that content can be anything from walkthroughs, tooltips, different kinds of interactive guides, simulations, all kinds of things. Even gamification is used in some of these tools. But the idea is that we're providing a consistent user experience to everybody, no matter what software tool they're using for their work. They're going to see a similar look and feel to this support, this kind of support that they're getting. And those of us who work with customers and understand that user experience, that customer experience is just critical, especially in these days of COVID, where we've got so many different demands on us, so many critical things that are trying to get our attention. Having that consistent user experience is a huge plus. So how then does a DAP actually work? You know, it's different than many of the things we used to use where we were putting people in a training sandbox or something that's really separate. These tools tend to be powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. Some of them focus on robotic process automation, RPA, so that instead of the user having to do all the tasks, you put in a little bit of information and the tool actually will do those tasks for you. And RPA is an evolution that these DAPs offer that you don't see in many other tools in the past. And then most of these tools, I will say, are used internally right now, but you can also use DAPs for external needs. So if you have a software or a website that your customers or maybe your suppliers use, DAPs could also support those. So the first question a lot of people have is a DAP the same thing as training? Can I get rid of my training because I have one? And in a word, no. What we find is that having a DAP alone does not drive adoption of a new solution. You need to have that broader adoption strategy. And really, the most important role we see for DAPs is you're driving application of learning to the job, and you're helping ensure the sustainability of your solution over time. So really, it's not so much about that initial learning, it's more about the solution over time. What we also see is the DAPs are a really good vehicle to allow what we call learning in the flow of work. Burson calls it learning where you're embedding learning right into the work you're doing versus pulling people from work to do learning. So really, Gartner called out in 2019, so just last year, the purpose here is not to replace training or coaching, but really increase adoption and reinforce training. Spend a minute talking about where did these DAPs come from? A lot of us who've been doing this kind of work for a long time remember back in the day when automated documentation was the big thing. Like you wouldn't have to cut and paste and use Snagit to get the content in. You could run the transaction and it would pull that content in. And that created help that you stored outside of the system, either in a big thick binder or somehow online. And as that tool evolved, you were still having the help outside the system, but you got to a point where you could do a single recording and have multiple kinds of outputs, simulations, test scripts, job aids, all kinds of things. And then the big moment that was very exciting was then we were able to link all that content to the production system, whatever system you were trying to do the job tasks in, with a context-sensitive linkage. And that let you break through the barrier of having to make the user go out and find the help somewhere. So they could just ask for help in the system and it would know where they were and bring up appropriate help. So a lot of folks are using a tool like that right now to be able to bring people help inside the system. But some companies have those tools and they haven't gotten around to actually making those context-sensitive links. So they have these great tools, but they aren't taking full advantage of that context sensitivity. What happened next, as we got to help inside the system, the next big breakthrough was that help actually got embedded into the systems that the users were using. So in the older models, that help was still outside the system. Here, it's actually part of the production system and linked in, and oftentimes, you go to a particular page and it's showing you on that page in the production system exactly what you need to do. You're accessing the help directly in that user environment. And in many of these tools, you're also getting guided on how to complete the task. So it's telling you the next step and the next step and the next step. And beyond that, there are tools now that give you the capability to set things up so that maybe the user puts in a few entries, but the tool actually completes the task in the system. And that robotic process automation, RPA, is just a huge time saver and works really well with some audiences. So we see it a lot in the Salesforce when they're trying to do, document new contacts and things like that. And it helps with your audiences who may not always be the most compliant in how to do job tasks. So what's driving companies to embrace these DAPs? Obviously, digital technology is advancing at a mind-boggling pace, and some of our employees and users are using, 5, 10, 15 different systems on a daily basis, and they have to navigate that whole thing, and they can't keep up with not just the systems that they have to use, but those systems, a lot of them cloud-based systems, they change periodically. So how do we keep them up to speed on that? Traditional training is not practical and it's not effective. And that's particularly true now in the time of COVID where, before you would just pull those people out and stick them in a classroom for half a day or a day. Can't do that anymore. So really, we're being driven to having new solutions. And at the same time, our learners are demanding new solutions because they're living in a world of, customer satisfaction and customer experience where they go on Amazon and it tells them, gives them the best recommendations. It walks them through the process. They expect that in other aspects of their life, including the learning world. So you can see companies are, really being driven right now to embrace DAPs. So how are they different from other tools that people might have been using? From a usability experience, obviously they're giving that great user experience across all the different systems. And as usability and accessibility is improved, that's going to drive adoption everywhere in the organization. At the same time, For companies that are able to use those RPA capabilities, that's a huge, clear benefit on return on investment. But at the same time, from a development strategy, from a solution strategy perspective, it's really important in these times to have a strategy to guide which tasks get documented and how they are documented. You have to balance that complexity of documentation versus that usability and user experience. And I talked to some companies and they've done, thousands of job aids to help users. And it's like, well, how many of those are being used and are you maintaining them all? You really need to have a strategy in place here. And particularly if you're using DAPs with that embedded content that's in your production system, it has to be developed in such a way that as a user's doing a task, it doesn't get hung up if the system does something unexpected. Or if your user does something unexpected. So, this idea, for example, of documenting something as simple as an expense report. It seems very simple, but at the same time, every expense report is a little bit different, and the tasks that users do are going to be different. If your system is trying to walk them through a particular path and they have a different thing that they're trying to do in the system, it's going to get hung up and they're going to get frustrated and not want to use the help. So really critical to have that development strategy in place. And then, of course, from a usability perspective, it's even more critical to keep the content up to date because the moment that content is out of sync with your production system, things are going to get hung up, users aren't going to use it, and that's particularly true if you're using it for RPA. Another question we hear from customers is, how do DAPs support the 5 moments of need? A lot of companies are really very keen on the 5 moments of need. Bob Mosher and Conrad Goffredson's methodology, which is great and looks at things, again, from a user perspective, from a learner perspective. So the good news is that DAPs are great in supporting 5 moments of need, from everything from, getting them help or learning at the time of need when they first need to learn, to giving them links and opportunities to branch to additional content when they're ready to learn more. Applying and refining as you're in doing tasks, you can ask for additional content and easily provide them with additional content to help them learn more. And the big bonus here, adjusting to change. So as the systems evolve, as business processes change, these DAPs have alerts and notifications and content that you can push out to users. And of course, finally, react when something goes wrong. That's where the context sensitivity often comes in, because people will be able to, when they get to that point where something goes wrong, ask for help and get the help when mid-task, when they need it, instead of having to go out and look for it. So great support of the 5 moments of need from these tools. And then the other thing we think about a lot is, so how does a DAP work with adoption of technology and what I'm calling the new normal, our new world, in the COVID world and post-COVID? Learning is going to look a little different. And what we are working with customers on is implementing solutions that meet these four key criteria. First is change messaging, making sure that we can get people's attention when things are changing. How do we, draw their attention from all the other things in their lives and help them learn about what this change is that's coming up? Giving them targeted online learning and learning in the flow of work. So this really reflects some of the macro learning and micro learning philosophies that are being pushed out by Josh Bersin and others. He talks about macro learning as being like onboarding learning, and then learning in the flow of work as being all the things you learn once you're onboarded. In technology world, we think of macro learning as being that learning that has to happen before go live, and then learning in the flow of work are all the things you learn to do as you apply what you've learned back on the job. So maybe the philosophy, the processes, the new terminology are the new macro learning, and the back on the job is, how do I actually execute this task in the system? And then the fourth element here are those empowered adoption advocates. So in the olden days, these were super users or power users, perhaps. Those people might have been, down the hall or in another building. Nowadays, they're working from home potentially. They aren't around. You're working different shifts than them. So how do we empower those people to do that same kind of support in the new environment? And as we look at DAPs and how they can support that new normal, there's a really nice fit. So change messaging, we can augment anything with messages from the DAP to get people's attention and take advantage of that in-app deployment of the change messaging. When we get to creating that introductory learning, that macro learning, obviously these DAPs have a lot of abilities to create e-learning chunks, and that can often be, the completion of that can often be tracked using SCORM. Of course, we've got context-sensitive, just-in-time learning and performance support that's available to give those micro-learning pits. And then, last but not least, we want to teach those adoption advocates how to use the DAP to support their users and make sure they push that use. And some companies are even considering authoring capabilities for those folks to help them build that solution. So as we're thinking now about DAPs, how do you select one? There's a wide range of tools that are now calling themselves DAPs. And so you have to really go back and think pretty critically about what are my business requirements, what are the user requirements, what are the functional requirements we're trying to meet, what are IT and security requirements? Most of these tools are in the cloud, so that might impact usability for your organization. Another big piece is how do you integrate this with what you already have going on, and do you transfer existing content into the tool? And if that's going to be something that you're going to want to look at, you want to be very clear on what the tool offers to try to automate that process or make it easier, because there's a wide range of capabilities there. Budget and resources, you need to think not just about implementation, not just about licensing, but also about maintenance, because maintenance is critical. You can't just build this content and stick it in, on the shelf somewhere. You have to maintain it or it's not going to be effective. And then last but not least, these two final bullets kind of come together. Future use cases, how might you want to use it in the future? And what's the tool's development path? So you might not be ready for our RPA right now, but you think you might want to be, then look for a tool that has that, or a tool that's going to be developing that capability. So a lot of things to think about as you're thinking about these tools. If you want to learn more, we're here to help, and feel free to reach out. We also have an infographic available to you to try to help educate your colleagues and yourself maybe a little bit more about these tools. So feel free to reach out and ask for that. I thank you so much for your time and wish you the best as you're moving on to these new technology opportunities that we have in our near future. Thanks so much.
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resources-library.